On the 28th of November 1978, a packed out SCG crowd bore witness to a day-night game between the Australians and the West Indians. But completely unknown to those there, this game would go on to change the game of cricket forever, and shape many of the aspects that we see in the modern day game. And yet, the most bizarre thing, this game you are seeing right now isn't even technically cricket. In the early 1970s, the world was coming to grips with a huge cultural shift that had taken place throughout the 1960s. Pop culture had drastically changed, as rock and roll represented a rebellion by youth against the strict social norms that had previously overruled much of society. And at the centre of this was the introduction of television in most living rooms, which revolutionised entertainment. The world was changing into a much more rapid and fast-paced society. There was now a sense of freedom in how people dressed, talked, and what they would do. However, a lot of the traditional forms of entertainment were now at risk of being trapped in the past. And cricket was no exception to this. The sudden advent of having television in every living room had provided a short-term boost to the popularity of cricket, but it was alarmingly obvious that the game didn't fit in with the modern times. As a Medium reporter wrote, Test cricket faced criticism for being too long and inaccessible for casual fans. And if you look at the length of a game of rugby compared to a game of Test cricket, it is no wonder that the game was at threat of becoming obsolete. Young people didn't want to spend 5 days at a game where tradition and being a gentleman overruled competition. But then seemingly out of nowhere, a rained out MCG test in Melbourne in 1970 brought with it an ingenious idea. To provide Melburnians with a bit of consolation for their rained off test, a 1-day 40 overs a side game was scheduled, a 1-day international. Around 45,000 people packed into the MCG to watch this first of a kind international game. And admittedly, the run rate was only marginally higher than that of a traditional test, and both teams were still wearing whites and using a red ball. But nonetheless, cricket had stumbled upon its key to the future. Well, sort of. Yes, the 1-day international game did offer a way for spectators to see a result without having to spend 5 days at a game, and it had the potential to be exciting, but it still had a lot of the same boring aspects of Test cricket. Like I mentioned, slow run rates, white clothes, a red ball. It was essentially just a day of Test cricket. So there was a dilemma. How do we make 1-day international cricket exciting enough to bring it into the modern age? Or better yet, cricket in general? Well, as it turns out, history would have 2 solutions to that problem. And the first would come 4 years after that first ODI in 1975. In 1912, the newly formed Imperial Cricket Conference came up with the idea to host a triangular 9-match tournament between England, Australia, and South Africa in the UK, to act as a kind of primordial World Cup, as these 3 were the only Test nations in the world at the time. Depending on the success of the first tournament, the triangular tournament was intended to occur every 4 years. However, unbeknownst to the organisers, 1912 would go on to be one of the wettest and coldest summers on record in England. A tournament that was dampened by a weak Australian team and a lack of interest from the English public for the Australia and South Africa games meant it was nothing short of a disaster. It was so bad, in fact, that the ICC refused to host anything more than a bilateral series from there onwards. Now moving into the early 60s, amidst a fall in the attendances at the English County Championships, a limited overs 1 innings per side 1-day competition was developed to attract more spectators. The tournament went on to be so successful that with the introduction of the 1-day international in 1971, the ICC decided to have another crack at creating an international cricket tournament, one where international teams would battle it out in a selected location to be labelled world champions, just like the already existing FIFA World Cup. And as at the time England was the only location that had the infrastructure for such an event, that in 1975 the first Cricket World Cup was scheduled to be played in England. And there were 2 fundamental changes that cricket underwent during this tournament. Ever since that first test between Australia and England all the way back in the 1800s, there had always been a favouritism in place for these two sides in particular. The Ashes would almost always take priority in scheduling and attract considerably more fans than any other games. But the nature of the World Cup is that it levels the playing field, giving other nations a chance to front up against some of the larger teams and attract a following which they otherwise wouldn't normally get. And above all, the World Cup brought with it the opportunity for cricket to be commercialised and marketed at a large scale, showing the potential for broadcasters to generate large amounts of money off of cricket and maximise entertainment for viewers. But there's just still something missing. Let's see if you can answer this simple question. Take a look at these two videos here. Which one of these games is a test match and which one is a one-day international? Hard to tell, right? Well, it's actually a trick question. They're both one-day internationals. But that's exactly my point. The one-day internationals still carried much of the same aspects as test matches. Sure, the World Cup had injected some life into cricket, but that only happens once every 4 years. Where are the missing pieces of the puzzle? Well, as it turns out, those pieces would be found in perhaps the most unconventional way possible. During the 1976 Australian summer, the Sydney Cricket Ground announced over their loudspeakers that they had received $250,000 in gate sales alone, close to $1.5 million today. And with the players each only receiving $200 per test match, it didn't take much to figure out that they were receiving an extremely small cut of the pay. Nowhere near enough for cricket to be their sole source of income. And with the increasing number of matches scheduled throughout the year, it made it very difficult for players to hold down a second job. With rising player dissatisfaction with the Australian Cricket Board, Dennis Lillee, Australia's premier fast bowler at the time, had an idea. To generate some extra income for the players, he suggested that every year Australia should play a one-off test against a team made up of the best players from around the world. And the idea was that the players would then pocket the profit made from this exhibition match to ease any financial struggles. And of course, this was rejected by the highly conservative Australian Cricket Board at the time, but it wasn't over for Lillee yet. Kerry Packer was an Australian media mogul who was a large prominent figure in Australia in the late 20th century. A large dominant man who was known for his fiery temper and witty remarks. A true one-in-a-million character. And in 1974, after the death of his father, Packer assumed control of the Channel 9 network and wanted to drastically turn things around as their ratings were on a decline. And the main drive behind this method was to get more sport on Channel 9. He secured the rights to the Australian Golf Open, but his eyes were on the big prize, cricket. You see, Packer, unlike many others at the time, realised the huge commercialisation potential cricket had. Sports Australians are typically interested in, like rugby, Australian rules, and you could even say soccer, are notoriously hard to commercialise as the game is essentially continuous, with the only real opportunity for ads being at half time. But cricket is different. With a lengthy, almost minute-long break in between each over, and with hundreds of overs in a test match alone, it's a great opportunity to squeeze in a few ads, not even mentioning the lunch and tea breaks. And so in 1976, when it was once again time to renew the broadcasting rights, Packer fired in a 1.5 million Australian dollar offer, almost 8 times that of the next highest bid from the government-run Australian Broadcasting Commission, which had held the rights for decades. And to Packer's astonishment, the Australian Cricket Board awarded the rights back to the ABC. Begrudging Packer so much at what he felt was total favouritism, he then went totally rogue. When Dennis Lillee's proposal to the Australian Cricket Board for an exhibition match was flatly denied, his manager had been aware of the hardship Kerry Packer had just faced trying to get cricket on his television, and he decided to set up a meeting between the two. Bonded by their mutual frustration with the Australian Cricket Board, they didn't just decide to set up an exhibition match. They organised an entire breakaway league called World Series Cricket, in what was essentially an extreme form of protest. But if you're going to take down a giant, you're going to have to get your strategy right. And there were 3 major obstacles that World Series Cricket had to face to get off the ground. When staging a breakaway league, The first and most obvious issue is where are you even going to get the players from? To even be able to host a single match, you need at least 22 players. And you don't just want any random cricketers either, you want the best of the best if you're going to compete with official cricket. But how do you convince the world's top players to ditch their national teams for a risky rogue league? Well, there's one thing Packer had that the national cricket boards didn't. Over the course of early 1977, Dennis Lillee, Australian captain Ian Chappell, and England captain Tony Greig set about secretly recruiting over 25 players from Australia, England, West Indies, South Africa, and Pakistan, with promises of contracts over $10,000 per year compared to the couple $100 players would earn per test match. Yep, what Packer had was money, and he wasn't afraid to use it either. What was truly incredible though was the fact that not one of these 25 players broke their silence. But in May 1977, World Series cricket was accidentally leaked to the English media, and when the cricketing world found out, the walls started to cave in. Packer was forced into a huge legal battle with the ICC, and the result of that would bring forth his second and third major problems. Weird as it may seem, the rules, terms, and names within cricket are actually trademarked. Even the name of the sport itself, cricket, is trademarked also, meaning that you can't just form your own international league and label it as cricket. And this was the result of the legal issues that World Series cricket faced. Packer wasn't allowed to call the games tests, he wasn't allowed to call a team made up of Australian players Australia, and he wasn't allowed to call it cricket. A bit of a blow, especially in terms of marketing. I mean, how are you going to attract spectators to come and watch a game of cricket that technically isn't even cricket? And so, in the end, he was forced to rename the tests to Super Tests, Australia to the Australians, and cricket became simply World Series cricket. Not ideal, but good enough. But probably the biggest conundrum that came from this legal battle was the fact that he was denied access to traditional Australian cricket grounds. And so he had to compromise by leasing a few Australian rules football grounds dotted around the country instead. Curating cricket pitches is one of the most complex and time-consuming projects for a grounds worker. Cricket pitch at a ground already with a wicket block in place takes around 10 days to prepare. But at a ground not traditionally used for cricket, that's going to take a while. With a short turnaround from the Australian rules season to the scheduled Super Tests, there was quite literally not enough time to prepare a pitch. And the solution to this was a genius and revolutionary idea that now sees widespread use within cricket and other sports. You may not be able to grow a traditional cricket pitch at a ground in such a short time, but you can accelerate that growth in a hothouse. And so, with the help of world-class curator John Maley, World Series cricket pioneered drop-in pitches. Essentially, a cricket pitch is prepared outside the venue at an accelerated rate in a hothouse, and then once ready, is brought to the ground, a block is removed from the centre, and the wicket is then placed in by a crane. Finally, after having overcome everything official cricket could throw at them, World Series cricket was finally ready to commence. And on the 2nd of December 1977, the first Super Test between the Australians and the West Indians was set to take place at VFL Park in Melbourne. However, rather unsurprisingly, World Series cricket started off with a bit of a flop. The media at the time had taken such a hostile stance against World Series cricket that it made it even harder to win over those die-hard loyal fans of the official Test team. But if anything, this provided Packer with the perfect opportunity. Attempting to win over the long-term supporters of official cricket is always going to be a huge challenge, and there's no guarantee you'll find any success. Instead, Packer thought, well, why don't we market to those that don't already have a strong attachment to cricket, i.e. women and children. If you remember back to the start of the video, the world had undergone a radical change over the previous decade, and the average person was no longer interested in the long, slow and dull spectacle that was cricket. Cricket needed some vibrancy to it, something exciting to draw the younger audiences in. So Packer decided to ditch his Super Test for the most part and put a hard focus on one-day international games. But he didn't just stop there. With this, he also brought about the introduction of day-night games being played under floodlights, swapped the boring white kits for bright, colourful clothing, and launched an aggressive marketing campaign featuring catchy songs and exhilarating highlights packages. Sure enough, more and more people began piling into the games to watch Paca's creation, and they even began pulling long-term fans over from the official games as well. For the first time, a regular game of cricket was exciting, and the high quality of gameplay made the games ever more thrilling. The Australian Cricket Board just did not have the cash reserves to keep up with Paca's new trailblazing league. And in 1978, the New South Wales government finally dropped its hostile stance against World Series cricket and permitted Paca to use the SCG for the first one-day game of the season. And on the 28th of November, a packed out SCG in Sydney, with a line of people miles long waiting to get in, had confirmed the inevitable. World Series cricket had officially taken over official cricket, and the Australian Cricket Board had no answer. They just didn't have the money to compete. For the first time, the world had witnessed just how entertaining and commercialized cricket could be, and the propelling of the game into the modern day age was officially complete. But despite what seemed to be a total success, the truth was Paca had poured large amounts of money into World Series cricket, and to continue doing so for the foreseeable future was going to be unsustainable. And so at the end of the 1978/79 season, Paca and the Australian Cricket Board agreed to end hostilities, with Paca dissolving World Series cricket in exchange for A, television rights on Channel 9, and B, the Australian Cricket Board agreeing to pay the players fairly. And so, just as fast as it came, World Series cricket was now a thing of the past. But cricket itself was changed forever. Much of the things that are a staple of the modern day game, whether it be coloured kits, day-night games, drop-in pitches, and the overall entertainment value of the sport, owes itself to Kerry Paca and the cricketers of the late 70s for standing up against the cronyist cricket boards of the time and revolutionising the game forever.